My name is Lauren McClellan. I'm 24 years old. I've spent most of my life feeling like a visitor in my own family, and even now saying that out loud still feels strange. You'd think after 2 decades you'd get used to it, the distance, the awkward silences, the subtle jabs hidden behind polite smiles, but somehow it still catches me off guard. My family isn't dramatic or explosive. They're the opposite, really. Quiet, civil, perfectly pleasant to outsiders. But when you grow up being the one person who never quite fits into that carefully curated picture, the loneliness becomes its own kind of noise. I drifted away from them the moment I left for college, not because of a fight or a big argument like people usually assume, but because it was easier. Easier than sitting at the dinner table pretending to belong. Easier than trying to talk about things I cared about while my parents glanced at each other with that look that said, "There she goes again." They never said it out loud, but they didn't have to. Their silence did the talking. From the outside, Leah, my sister 5 years older, had everything I didn't. She was effortlessly social, always charming, always right in the middle of the room, laughing at something that probably wasn't even that funny. She was the daughter who made sense in our family. I was the daughter who didn't. When I drifted away, no one grabbed my arm and asked me to stay. No one even asked why. I guess some part of me expected them to. I guess a smaller, naive part thought maybe they cared more than they pretended. But they didn't. So holidays became the only time I saw them, and even then it always felt like I was taking up space that wasn't meant for me. And honestly, I thought I had made peace with that. Then last Christmas happened. Jonathan, Leah's fiancé, joined us for dinner. It was the first time I'd met him, and he walked into their house like someone completely unaffected by the quiet hierarchy that ruled that place. I could tell instantly he wasn't cut from the same cloth. He didn't talk down to me. He didn't look away mid-sentence. He didn't treat me like I was made of static electricity buzzing awkwardly in the corner. He just talked like a normal person. He asked me about school, about the places I'd traveled to, about why I chose my major, and every time I answered, he actually listened. Full attention. No sideways glances. No subtle dismissals. I didn't realize how much that meant until it was happening. And Leah noticed. Oh, she noticed immediately. Her smile tightened. Her eyes became sharp in that way I remembered from childhood, like she was scanning the room for something to criticize. At first I thought I imagined it. But when Jonathan asked me about a story from one of my college road trips, Leah's hand shot out and grabbed his arm under the table. A warning. A claim. A "don't you forget who you're supposed to be paying attention to" kind of gesture. It took me right back to being 15 and interrupting her sleepover in the kitchen. How she and her friends paused, giggled, whispered, and rolled their eyes, like I didn't belong in my own home. That same feeling crept up on me now, except this time I was an adult and Jonathan was the only person making me feel visible. The rest of the night was a blur of polite conversation wrapped in tension so thin it was almost invisible, but not to me. I felt it in every glance Leah threw my way. I felt it when my mother asked Jonathan if he wanted more wine without even acknowledging I'd been talking. I felt it when my father called Leah our star girl, in that proud tone he never used for me. Still, I didn't expect what came next. When dinner wrapped up and everyone was lingering in the living room, Leah pulled me aside. Not gently, not privately, just far enough that our parents couldn't quite hear, but close enough that Jonathan could see us. She didn't waste a second. "I know what you're doing," she hissed, and her voice had that icy, blade-thin edge I remembered too well. "You've always been jealous of me, Lauren. And now you're trying to steal my fiancé." I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so stunningly absurd my brain couldn't process it any other way. "Steal your fiancé," I repeated. "Leah, we talked about school and travel. That's it." She stepped closer. "Don't play innocent. I saw the way you looked at him." The way I looked at him, I opened my mouth, closed it again, and for a moment, all I could think about was how many times I'd been painted as the problem simply because she decided I was. It didn't matter if the accusation made no sense. Leah said it. My parents would believe it. That's how it always worked. "I'm not doing this with you," I finally said, trying to keep my voice steady. "If you're insecure, that's your issue, but don't drag me into your drama." Her face twisted into something that almost resembled disgust. That same teenage expression, the one she'd use when mocking me in front of her friends. Except now it was sharpened with adulthood and entitlement. You think Jonathan can't see it? She whispered. You think he doesn't notice how desperate you are for attention. The words hit with an old, familiar sting. Not because they were true, but because she knew exactly where to aim. I didn't respond. I walked away. Because arguing with Leah was like trying to reason with a storm, loud, destructive, and entirely uninterested in your point of view. I thought that would be the end of it, but the universe apparently wasn't done with me. A few months later, I found out from my grandparents, not my sister, not my parents, that Leah was engaged. Officially. Rings and announcements and planning underway. And the only reason I knew it all was because my grandmother casually brought it up over tea. Oh, sweetheart, Leah's wedding is going to be beautiful, she'd said, stirring her cup. It's a shame you girls aren't closer. I had smiled tightly. Because what else was I supposed to do? Part of me still hoped stupidly that despite everything, Leah would at least think I deserved to know, but I guess that was expecting too much. Weeks passed. Nothing. No call. No text. No invite. And then one evening, my phone lit up with her name. Lauren, she said flatly, I'm not inviting you to the wedding. No hesitation. No softness. Just that cold tone that said she wasn't calling to discuss, she was calling to declare. Why I asked, though, I already knew. Because Jonathan has feelings for you. I don't want you there. It'll make things awkward. I didn't laugh this time. I just felt tired. Deep bone level tired. Have a great wedding and a happy marriage, I said quietly. And I hung up. I thought that was the end of my part in her story. I had no idea the real disaster was only just beginning. The day after Leah banned me from the wedding, I woke up strangely calm. Not peaceful, just emptied out. Like all the years of trying, all the years of swallowing things to keep the peace had finally settled into this quiet, resigned acceptance. Leah didn't want me there. Fine. It wasn't the first time she pushed me to the fringes of her life. It just happened to be the most blatant. I genuinely thought that was it, that she'd get married, move on, and I'd go back to pretending we existed on parallel paths that never crossed. But I didn't know Jonathan as well as I thought. A few days later, my dad called me out of nowhere. He never calls me unless someone's in the hospital or it's a major holiday. So when his name flashed on my screen, my stomach tightened. Lauren, he said, his voice unusually strained. You need to come down to the venue right now. I blinked. Why? What's going on? It's important. His voice jumped an octave tight with urgency. Just come. No, I said immediately. You don't get to summon me like a stray dog. What's happening? But he wouldn't tell me. Not a word. Just the same command over and over like I was a child, and he still believed his voice carried that kind of weight for me. I hung up. It took him less than 3 minutes to call again. This time I let it ring. He texted, called again. When I didn't answer, my mother tried. Then Leah. I didn't pick up any of them. But eventually curiosity mixed with a sick kind of dread. Not enough to make me go to the venue, but enough that when the phone rang again, and it was Leah, I hesitated before pressing decline. And then stupidly I answered. Her voice came through sharp and brittle, like she'd been screaming before she called me. Jonathan won't marry me, she said without greeting. He walked out. Because of you. I closed my eyes. Because of me. Leah, what does that... He thinks I'm being cruel, she snapped. He's siding with you, saying I'm overreacting, saying I treated you horribly by banning you. I didn't respond. There were too many layers to that sentence, and none of them surprised me. Then she dropped the real reason she called. I need you to come to the rehearsal dinner, she said, and tell everyone you didn't want to be invited. That it wasn't my fault. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was insane. Absolutely not. Lauren, please, she said through clenched teeth. I need this. Leah, I said calmly. You banned me. You accused me of trying to steal your fiancé. And now you want me to show up and lie for you. Yes, she exploded. Because he's making me look insane. He's saying the only reason he won't marry me is because I treated you unfairly. I heard the word unfairly echo in her voice like it was a foreign concept she'd never had to confront. Fix this, she demanded. Fix what you caused. I hung up without another word. I put my phone on silent and went to bed. And to be honest, I slept better than expected. I woke up to chaos. 7 missed calls from my parents. 6 from Leah. A ridiculous chain of messages, over 200 times buzzing through my notifications with frantic urgency. The family group chat that I was technically still in but never spoke in was exploding. Dad, Lauren, call me now. Mom, we need to talk. This is serious. Leah, you did this. Leah, pick up your phone. Leah, answer me. Leah, I swear if you don't at least try to help, I tossed the phone aside and inhaled deeply, trying to clean the panic from my chest. But then guilt tried creeping in, not because I'd done anything wrong, but because my grandparents were the only two people who ever treated me like I mattered. So I called my grandmother back. She answered on the first ring. "Oh, Lauren," she sighed. "Sweetheart, things have gotten so bad." She told me that Jonathan still wasn't talking to Leah or anyone else. He'd vanished after storming out. Leah had spent the whole night crying. My parents were in full disaster management mode. The wedding was less than 24 hours away, and everything was collapsing. Maybe my grandmother said gently, "You should talk to Jonathan, just to explain. Clear up misunderstandings." "What misunderstandings?" I asked softly. I didn't mean it harshly, just honestly. "He thinks Leah was cruel," she said, lowering her voice. "He thinks the whole family was wrong." I closed my eyes. For years, I'd wondered whether anyone outside of my grandparents could see who my family really was behind closed doors. Apparently, Jonathan had. Still, I told Grandma I'd think about it not because I wanted to, but because I needed the calls and stress to stop long enough for me to breathe. But my peace didn't last. Not even an hour later, my doorbell rang. I checked the peephole. My heart froze. My parents, Leah and Jonathan, all standing on my porch. It felt like the world narrowed down to a pinpoint. I opened the door only enough to step outside. I wasn't about to let them into my space. "What are you all doing here?" I asked. Leah pushed forward immediately, her makeup-smudged eyes red, desperation, twisting her features into something almost unrecognizable. "You need to fix this," she said, voice trembling. "Tell Jonathan the truth." I folded my arms. I did tell the truth. "No," she snapped. "Tell his version of the truth, the one that makes this make sense." I looked at Jonathan. He stood stiffly behind her silent eyes, tracing my expression like he was searching for answers he already knew. And then something inside me broke open. A threshold, a line I'd spent my whole life tiptoeing around. I was done. So I told him. Everything. Calmly. Clearly. Without flinching. How Leah accused me of trying to steal him. How she banned me from the wedding. How my family always treated me like the problem. How this wasn't a one-time incident, it was a lifetime of blame and manipulation. Jonathan listened without interrupting. His jaw tightened. His eyes flicked toward Leah with something like dawning horror. And then it happened. A sharp, stinging crack echoed in the air. Leah had slapped me. Hard. So hard my head snapped sideways. For a second, I just stood there, stunned, my cheek burning. Old instincts rose immediately, the ones conditioned into me, since childhood, telling me to shrink, to apologize, to be quiet. But I wasn't 15 anymore, and I wasn't going to be her punching bag. I lifted my hand, not to strike her, but to stop her if she tried again, but Jonathan stepped between us, grabbing her arm. "Enough," he said, voice low and final. What followed was a blur of whispered arguments between them a few feet away. Her face crumpling, his expression turning cold. My parents frozen, not defending me, not scolding her, just watching like spectators at a show. Then Leah broke. Tears streamed down her face. She looked at all of us and said, "It's over. The engagement is over." Jonathan didn't deny it. He just walked away, and none of them followed. I stepped back, opened my front door, and said the only thing I could. "I'm done with all of this." Then I shut the door. The silence inside my house felt heavier than the chaos outside. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like the beginning of something new. When the door clicked shut and the voices outside faded into muffled echoes, I stood there in the silence, my back pressed against the wood, my breath tight and shallow. My cheek still pulsed from the slap, a bright burning reminder of how quickly Leah could turn violent when her world cracked. I wasn't shocked she hit me. I was only shocked it took her this long. I slid down to the floor, resting my elbows on my knees. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the adrenaline crash that comes after years of restraint finally snap. Outside, I could hear blurred voices, my mother trying to soothe Leah. My father muttering angrily, the sound of hurried footsteps on the porch. I didn't know if they were still arguing, or if they'd simply started arguing with each other instead of me, now that the door separated us. Eventually, the noise moved farther away. I heard a car door slam, then another, and then as if the world had pressed mute, everything fell quiet. I didn't open the door again. Not to check, not to see if they were gone, not to see if Jonathan was still standing there. I just sat in the stillness, absorbing the moment. It felt surreal, like I'd finally witnessed a truth I had spent years trying to explain to myself. The slap wasn't the climax. It was the symptom. The culmination of a lifetime of being the scapegoat, the punching bag, the misplaced target for Leah's insecurities, and my parents' blind loyalty. But strangely, I didn't cry. I thought I would. Maybe the old version of me would have. The one who swallowed pain quietly and told therapists she was fine. But instead, my chest slowly loosened, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. Jonathan choosing to leave Leah didn't have anything to do with me, not really. He made his own decision based on what he saw, what he'd been seeing for months maybe. And while that wasn't my burden to carry, it still felt like finally, someone outside of my grandparents had seen the truth of my family's dynamic without me begging to be understood. That was the part that shook me most. Someone finally saw me. Not as the dramatic one, not as the distant one, not as the black sheep. Just me. The truth had been standing there in plain sight for years, but no one wanted to acknowledge it until the consequences hit them directly in the face. Sometime after noon, my phone buzzed again, just once. One text. I didn't rush to read it. I made myself some tea first, sat on my couch, stared at the ceiling for a long minute. Then finally I checked. It was from my grandmother. "Grandma, sweetheart, I love you. Don't blame yourself. Let things settle. No guilt, no pressure, just love." I clutched the phone to my chest for a moment, but the silence didn't last long. 2 hours later, my phone lit up again, this time from an unknown number. Ordinarily, I would have ignored it, but something told me to check. "Jonathan, I'm sorry. For everything. For what she did. You didn't deserve that." I stared at the message, thumb hovering over the keyboard. I didn't know Jonathan well, barely at all, in fact. But it said something that in all that chaos, he was the only one apologizing. I didn't text back. Not because I didn't want to, but because I genuinely didn't know what to say. He wasn't my problem to fix. He wasn't my emotional responsibility. He'd already made his choice. The next day, the storm quieted. My parents didn't call. Leah didn't call. There were no knocks at the door, no confrontations, no demands. It was like the entire wedding had evaporated, and with it, the obligation to pretend we were a functioning family. For a moment, I thought the peace might last. But quiet in my family is never a good sign. Quiet means plotting. Quiet means resentment building in the dark. Quiet means the eye of the storm, not the end of it. And I wasn't wrong. The shift came slowly, so slowly I almost missed it. It started with how the house felt different the next morning. Heavier charged like the air before a summer thunderstorm. I couldn't place why at first, but then around 6 a.m. when I stepped outside to grab a package from the porch, I froze. Eggs. Splatters of them across the railing. The siding, the concrete. Dripping half-dried yellow streaks like someone had murdered breakfast on my front steps. The smell hit me next. Sour, rotten, sticky. My heart didn't drop. It didn't break. It just tightened. Of course. Of course Leah would retaliate. I stared at the mess for a long moment. Not angry, not shocked, just exhausted. A tiredness born from knowing she had so much rage inside her that she had to expel it somewhere. And of course she chose me. I spent that morning cleaning the mess. Bucket, sponge, gloves, the whole thing. My hands grew red and raw from scrubbing, but I didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't call anyone. I just cleaned while the neighborhood joggers passed by, giving me confused glances. I almost wanted one of them to ask what happened so I could shrug and say, "Oh, my sister," as if that explained everything. By the second egging, I wasn't surprised. By the third, I was furious. Not furious at the eggs, furious at the familiarity, at the way Leah always found ways to make me the villain, even when she was the one destroying herself. I tried calling my parents, hoping that maybe after everything they'd step in. They didn't. My father sounded inconvenienced. My mother sounded tired. "It's between you two girls," they said. Girls. Not women, not adults, not victims or aggressors. Just girls. I hung up before I said something I'd regret. And that's when something in me snapped, not in anger, but in certainty. I called Leah. She answered on the second ring. "What do you want?" she spat. "You egg my house one more time," I said, my voice low, steady, unshaken, "and I will file a police report." Silence. Not shock, not fear, recognition. She knew I meant it. For once she knew I had boundaries. Then she launched into insults, dramatic, ungrateful, petty, selfish. The usual script. But it didn't hit the way it used to. Her words bounced off something new inside me, something I'd been building quietly with each act of defiance. I hung up mid-rant. And just like that, she went quiet. No more calls, no more eggs, no more numbers leaked, or harassment, or drive-by tantrums. Nothing. It wasn't peace, but it was the closest thing I'd had in a very long time. I stepped back inside my house, locked the door, and felt a slow, warm sense of control settle in my chest. For the first time ever, I didn't feel like the black sheep. I felt like someone who finally knew how to walk away. I didn't plan on revisiting my past. Honestly, after everything that happened with the wedding, I wanted nothing more than to push it all down beneath the floorboards of my memory and move forward. But trauma has a way of resurfacing when the present echoes the past too closely, and standing on my porch, scrubbing dried egg off the railing, was enough to bring it all crashing back. People always assume childhood trauma is loud, constant screaming, dramatic fights, visible bruises. But mine was quiet, polite, respectable. The kind you can't point to without someone saying, "Are you sure you're not exaggerating?" No, I wasn't exaggerating. I never exaggerated anything. When I was 10, I had my first panic attack during a school talent show. I wasn't performing, I was just watching. But something about the noise, the lights, the crowd pressing around me, made my chest lock up. I gasped for air and stumbled into the hallway, convinced I was dying. A teacher found me and called my parents. They arrived together looking annoyed, not worried. My mother knelt down beside me and said, "Lauren, sweetie, stop acting. Nothing is wrong with you." She didn't mean to be cruel. That was the worst part. She genuinely believed I was overreacting because in her world, anxiety wasn't an illness, it was a personality flaw. I think that was the first time I learned that being understood wasn't something I should expect. When I was 15, Leah had one of her infamous sleepovers. The house echoed with laughter all night, her friends' perfect hair, perfect smiles, playing music too loud, and pretending our parents didn't exist. I remember tiptoeing into the kitchen to grab something to drink, hoping I could get in and out unnoticed. But Leah noticed everything, if it gave her an opportunity. She looked up from the counter where she was arranging snacks and said loudly, "Oh, look!" The hermit crawled out of her cave. Her friends burst into laughter. I froze. Heat flooded my face. I wasn't angry. I was ashamed. That's what she was good at, making you embarrassed for simply existing. I remember putting my glass down, not saying a word, and walking back to my room. Behind me, I heard one of her friends whisper, "Why is she so weird?" and Leah laughing like she agreed. My parents didn't defend me. They never did. Later that night, when I told my mom what happened, she said, "Honey, she was just joking. You need to lighten up." I learned then that pain didn't matter unless someone else could feel it too. When I was 16, I had a meltdown before a big English presentation. I stayed up the whole night practicing, shaking so badly my notebook rattled. By morning, I couldn't breathe. Anxiety pooled in my chest so heavily I threw up. I told my parents I couldn't go to school. "You're going," my father said flatly. "You can't hide from responsibility." I gave the presentation with my voice trembling so much the class laughed. And when I got home, after crying in a bathroom stall for 2 hours, my dad said, "It wasn't that bad. You always make things into a bigger deal than they are." I swallowed that sentence like poison. By the time I left for college, I carried years of that poison in my bloodstream. The day I moved into my dorm, my family hugged me goodbye, like they were dropping off a distant cousin, not their daughter. Leah uploaded a picture on Instagram, captioned, "Finally, the house will be peaceful again." I laughed when I saw it, but it wasn't funny. That first semester, I felt like a cracked mirror reflecting everything around me, but unable to piece myself together. It wasn't until I walked into the campus counseling office during a panic attack that someone finally said the words I desperately needed. "You're not broken, you're overwhelmed, and you're not imagining things." The counselor gently asked about my family, and the moment I mentioned how they dismissed my feelings, her expression softened in a way no one's ever had. She suggested a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist diagnosed me with social anxiety disorder, something I had lived with for years without knowing its name. For the first time, everything made sense. The shaking hands, the stuttered breathing, the feeling that everyone's eyes were knives. It had a name. The validation changed everything. Therapy taught me coping strategies, boundaries, how to identify the difference between guilt and manipulation, how to recognize that sometimes families aren't cruel because they hate you. They're cruel because they refuse to understand something that challenges the perfect picture they want to portray. When I finally began keeping my distance, it wasn't out of anger, it was out of survival. But Leah didn't see it that way. Every time I skipped a family gathering, she'd say things like, "Oh, Lauren thinks she's too good for us now. She's so dramatic. She can't handle being around people." Every word she said about me felt like a shadow of the girl I used to be, the girl who truly believed those things were her fault. So when she slapped me on my porch, it wasn't just the sting of her hand that hurt. It was the echo. The old familiar echo of being punished for existing the wrong way. It shook something loose inside me, and once it loosened, everything rushed out. The memories, the shame, the resilience, the anger I never let myself feel. Maybe that's why when the egging started, I didn't spiral, I didn't cower, I didn't drown in the self-blame they conditioned me to carry. Instead, I found myself standing taller, sounding steadier, feeling stronger. It was as though each memory, every ignored panic attack, every insult brushed off as a joke, every dismissal of my pain was no longer a weight on my shoulders, but a brick in the foundation of the person I was finally becoming. Someone who didn't flinch at conflict, someone who didn't apologize for defending herself, someone who didn't need their approval anymore. People think therapy rewires your brain overnight. It doesn't. Sometimes it just plants seeds, and sometimes it takes a slap on your own porch for those seeds to finally grow. Looking back on everything from Leah's accusation at Christmas to the wedding fallout, I finally understood something I had avoided admitting for years. I wasn't the one who drifted away. They let me go. They watched me fade and didn't blink. And now, after everything that had happened, they wanted me back, only when losing me threatened the image they cared about more than the relationship itself. Once that realization settled, it felt like a door inside me finally closed. Not out of bitterness, but out of truth. And truth, I was learning, was the only path to peace. The calm before the final storm. The morning after the memories crashed over me, the world felt strangely quiet. Too quiet, like the pause between lightning and thunder when you're waiting for the ground to shake. I didn't know if Leah was done lashing out or simply gathering strength for the next blow. With her, silence was never safety. It was strategy. But nothing happened. No calls, no texts, no cars slowing down near my house, no shadows at my window. Just a stillness that felt almost fragile, like it could shatter under the weight of a single bad decision. I tried to focus on normal things, cleaning, cooking, catching up on work, but everything I did felt suspended, like my life had been knocked off its axis and hadn't settled back into place yet. And then the retaliation began. The first time she leaked my number, I didn't even realize what she'd done. My phone buzzed nonstop with messages from unknown numbers, some harsh, some mocking, some accidentally calling me names that sounded a lot like Leah's voice coming from borrowed mouths. I blocked the numbers. They reappeared. I blocked those too. New ones came. At one point, around midnight, I sat on my bed staring at the endless notifications, feeling something cold settle in my chest. This wasn't just petty jealousy anymore. It was obsession, spite, a need to punish me for the consequences she created herself. But I didn't respond. I didn't bend. I didn't crack. I didn't give her the performance she wanted. And that's when she escalated. The egging, the late-night knocks that stopped the moment I approached the door, the rustle of someone speeding away from my driveway, the way my porch light flickered mysteriously the same night someone unplugged it. It felt childish, yes, but also deeply unsettling, because Leah wasn't doing this as a prank. She was doing it as a warning. When you spend a lifetime being the punching bag, the bully panics, when you finally stand still and look them in the eye. The third egging incident broke something in me, not in defeat, but in clarity. I stood on my porch at dawn, cold air, stinging my skin, watching yolk drip down the siding, pooling into ugly stains at my feet. The sunrise cast a soft glow over the mess, almost beautiful if you ignored what it meant. I took a deep breath. And for the first time in my life, I realized something important. I wasn't scared of her anymore. I was tired, I was angry, but the fear gone. Maybe that's why I reached for my phone with steady hands and dialed her number without hesitation. She answered immediately. What she snapped, like she'd been waiting for the chance to unleash her rage. "This is your final warning," I said. My voice surprised even me, calm, level, controlled. "If you egg my house again, or leak my number, or harass me in any way, I will file a police report." Silence. A long, heavy silence that stretched between us like a wire pulled tight. Then she laughed, a high, brittle sound that trembled at the edges. "You're so dramatic," she spat, "always playing the victim. Grow up, Lauren." "I have," I said softly. "That's why this conversation is happening." More silence. For the first time in years. She didn't know what to say. I didn't wait for her to find the words. I hung up, and that was that. No more eggs, no more calls, no more buzzing phones or mysterious knocks or unknown messages. Just quiet. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't healing. It was absence. And honestly, that felt like its own kind of peace. In the weeks that followed, I found myself adjusting to a new normal. One where I didn't brace for insults hidden behind smiles. One where I didn't wake up with my heart pounding at every phone notification. One where I didn't feel obligated to shrink myself to keep the family equilibrium steady. For the first time, I existed without the weight of their expectations pressing down on my chest. One quiet afternoon, as I sat with a mug of tea and my grandmother called just to ask how I was doing, I felt something shift inside me, a tenderness, a softness I hadn't felt since childhood. Maybe healing wasn't loud declarations or dramatic confrontations. Maybe healing was simply choosing yourself every single day, even when the people who should have loved you first failed to love you at all. Maybe peace wasn't something they could give me. Maybe peace was something I had to claim. And on that quiet day, phone still house, clean heart steady, I finally did.